Hi, I'm Yuyao. My topic for today's presentation is Hierarchies of Power and Spectatorship in the Automated Snapper by Julian Hazel. So according to Morrison, surveillance connotes a hierarchical relationship in which the watcher holds power and control over the watched. However, in the automated snapper, more than one group of the watcher and the watched are presented. So a more complicated power hierarchy is formed. So my first argument is by empowering the audience in the shooting process, a three-level power hierarchy is formed. First, I would identify four groups in this performance: the two performers, the female voice, the participating audience, and the spectating audience. In the automated snapper, two performers perform in a wide cuboid-like space. Then audience are asked to participate in the performance voluntarily. A female voice directs the voluntary audience to operate a digital device which imitates a sniper rifle. The participating audience shoots behind the wall so that he or she cannot be seen by the performers, but the performers are shot by paintballs, which is shot by the audience. Here we can see a unidirectional flow of power. The model of panopticon raised by Jeremy Bentham in the late 18th century set the foundation to surveillance studies. In the late 20th century, Michel Foucault analyzed Bentham's model of panopticon in Discipline and Punish. As Foucault said, visibility is a trap. The tension between visibility and invisibility is one of the essential elements that determine one's position in the power hierarchy. The status of one being visible to others while the others are invisible puts the person in a very disadvantaged position. Just exactly as what happened on stage, the targets are exposed to the snapper, but the snapper hides himself behind the wall. The cuboid-like stage where the performers in represents all their fields of vision. For the performers, those who shoot them are invisible. Between the performers and the participating audience, the performers are the watched, the participating audience are the watcher. But speaking of participating audience and the female voice, all the audience's behavior is invisible and directed by the voice. However, the female voice stays mysterious. She or it acts as the narrative of the performance, as well as giving directions that makes everything happen. The voice is pretty similar to the guide in the central tower in the model of panopticon. The one in the central tower has the vision of every single corner of the prison, but hides himself in the dark. People know his existence, but never see him. In the automated snapper, the female voice is like a ghost hovers above. Audience know that all their behavior is visible to it, but the audience never see it, never know whether it is a human voice or just a programmed voice. Or even, is it being controlled by something else in a much higher position? When an audience volunteers to go on stage, as he becomes the watcher to the performers, he also becomes the watched to the female voice. Thus, we can see that the performer, the participating audience, and the female voice form a unidirectional power hierarchy. People who are at the bottom of the hierarchy hold the most limited field of view, while give the most exposure, while the ones who hold the most power have the full field of vision and give little exposure. As I mentioned in the beginning, there are four groups of people and other things in this performance. So now let's take a look at the last group of people, the spectating audience. Here comes my second argument. Habitual passive watching experience is challenged. The position and identity of spectator in the performance depends on how each individual interprets the performance. Theater is a form of surveillance as it contains relationship between the watcher and the watched, visibility and invisibility. Thus, in a traditional theater performance, audience who are watching in the dark holds the most power above all the performers being watched on stage. However, Morrison argues that in contemporary surveillance performance, the habitual role of invisible passive theater spectator is challenged. Surveillance artists strive to create critical spectators of surveillance culture, user-consumer participants who can more clearly see, evaluate, and respond to the forces of discipline and desire exerted on them by surveillance technologies in political, economic, and social arenas. This corresponds to the idea of emancipation raised by Jacques Rancière. And here is how Haug interprets this definition. Thinking emancipated spectatorship demands that one approaches spectatorship from the concept of equality, refuting the dichotomy between looking and acting. In this intellectual process, the emancipated spectator associates, dissociates, blurs boundaries and hierarchies, and produces a new self in ways that cannot be anticipated. In the automated snapper, the participating process and the three-level power hierarchy formed not only breaks the fourth wall, but also challenges the spectator's passivity and their habitual notion of being at the top of the power hierarchy. The relationship between the spectating audience and the rest three groups are interesting and leave spaces and possibilities to discuss. I argue that it is by the different ways each individual interpreting these relationships differently that passive spectatorship is abandoned and the emancipated spectatorship comes into being. The relationship between spectators and the voice leaves spectator to interpret. Spectator can see themselves as having the God view to the performers, including the voice. In this case, the spectators stands at the top of the power hierarchy. However, spectators can also interpret themselves as part of the performance, who are under surveillance and also being controlled by the voice. In this case, spectators put themselves at a lower position to the voice. Then, for the spectating audience and the participating audience, the spectating audience can see these two groups as audience and actors, the watcher and the watched, while they can also see themselves at the same position as the participating audience in a performance, because the participating audience to some extent represents all the audience, as they are part of the spectators as well. Identity of each spectator can affect how they emancipate performance greatly. Thinking about a U.S. student and one who has experienced wars in Iraq, they will definitely have different attitudes towards the performance and thus interpret this performance in their own ways. Thus, the spectating audience cannot be taken as a collective group of passive spectators, because each individual emancipates based on their own experience. After seeing this performance, audience may ask themselves questions like, who am I? Am I the commander, or the snapper, or the innocent victim? Who am I watching, and by whom am I being watched? Audience with different backgrounds and modes of thinking would choose different ways to emancipate the performance. In turn, they would produce different reflections on their positions and identities in the surveillance society that we are living. In conclusion, several groups of the watching and the watched can be identified in the automated snapper, and they form a unidirectional flow of a power hierarchy. The performance also challenges the passive spectating habit and motivates spectators to actively think about their position within the performance as well as beyond the performance. This is my presentation. Thank you.